I want to tell you a little bit about our charity first, which is Straight Talking. Straight Talking actually does what it says on the tin. It's a very simple organisation. We started off 15 years ago being called Straight Talking Project. And after a couple of years, I realised that this was a bit of a finite name, and it became Straight Talking Peer Education, so that we could turn ourselves into not just a project, but an all-encompassing charity for teenage pregnancy. I'm just going to give you a few facts about teenage pregnancy to give you a background about what we do. It's really important, as you can see, to reduce teenage pregnancy. We have still got the highest teenage pregnancy rate in the whole of Western Europe. It's considerably higher. There's a lot of poverty. 1 in 10 conceptions are to teenagers. Shockingly, they're twice as likely to die in childbirth, have the highest number of neonatal deaths, about 3 times the rate. Also, they're 3 times more likely to suffer from postnatal depression, far more likely to enter the criminal justice system, and teenage parents, significantly for us, are more likely to have children themselves who become teenage parents, and that means that it's a cycle over generations of poverty and deprivation. And of course, the cost to the taxpayer is a minimum of £100,000 in the first 5 years, and that's the cost of income support, housing benefit, maternity care, social services, all of those things, but it doesn't take into consideration if they do have, for example, postnatal depression and the kind of support they need there, or the cost of the housing benefits officer. So it's actually much higher than that, but that's a very, very conservative estimate for a very, very simple case of a teenage parent. So the government directives, we respond to them. There was a teenage pregnancy strategy about 12 years ago that aimed to reduce the rate of teenage conceptions by half and increase the proportion of young parents in education, employment and training. That's what we call NEETs to EATs, not in education, employment and training, and now in education, employment and training, to 60% by 2010. And a lot has happened over these years, hasn't quite reached its targets, but there have been reductions and there have been more teenage parents engaging in education, employment and training. So this is our mission statement. Straight Talking is enabling responsible choices about teenage pregnancy and parenthood through peer education and employment. So what do we do? Well, we actually employ teenage mothers and young fathers to go into schools and to teach young people about the realities and the implications of early parenthood. And I'll give you an example of the sort of things that our peer educators do. So I'd just like to ask, can you put your hand up in the audience, please, if you are a parent? Okay, we've got quite a few of you here. That's fantastic. Okay, I wonder if, I'm sorry, I'm going to engage you in this. Can you please tell me what, the women in the audience, can you tell me what pregnancy was like? Just something about pregnancy. Go on.
Fantastic, the most creative, best creation I've ever done.
Okay. Anybody else?
Timing.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? I don't know. I remember that I couldn't see my toes for such a long time. I was enormous and it was very uncomfortable. Yes, it was great. There were wonderful things about pregnancy. And of course, let's talk about parenthood. What about for the father? What was that like?
Well, the pregnancy or
the pregnancy? Absolutely, the pregnancy. What was that like for you?
Well, at times it was like walking on eggshells.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
A great surprise.
Sorry?
A great surprise.
Okay. And the parenting, what's that like?
A combination of challenging and rewarding.
Right.
Responsibility.
The responsibilities. Is it expensive?
Scary.
It's very scary. It's very expensive, isn't it?
And it goes on.
Yes, and it goes on and on and on. Yeah, and it doesn't get any better. Mine are 27 and 23. Honestly, they're just the same sometimes, exactly the same as they were when they were tiny. So when our teenage parents go into the classroom, they will say to 30 children in the class, all you girls, you're now pregnant, and all you boys, your girlfriends are pregnant. Tell us how that feels to be about 3 months pregnant. And it's fascinating what they say. And of course, our teenage parents have lived it. They've really, it's not just peer education, it's peer education plus, because they've been there, done it, and got the t-shirt as well. Very large t-shirt when they were pregnant, but they've got the t-shirt. And we talk about the implications for housing. So they have a raffle for housing. We have a game where they have to take the buggy with a £10 doll in it, up and down stairs and through heavy doorways. The doll's got about £10 of rice in it. So if there's ever a rice shortage in this country, you know where to come, because we've got tons of the stuff. And it's fascinating how the young people really get to grips with that. They really get it. But what we didn't realise when I first started, I didn't realise this, that the other aspect of this was that the teenage parents moved on because we were employing them. We were giving them a new experience. This is our motto, that young people may know how not to get pregnant, but they also need to know why not to get pregnant. And that includes these boys too, as you can see. Can I use this again? Okay. Okay, so the benefits of our employment for our teenage parents. They are the experts, and we're challenging their perceptions in particular of education. Most teenage mothers and young fathers have disengaged from education. They've got low self-esteem, they've got low sense of achievement, they don't think they did very well at school, so they've bailed out. And guess where we're sending them? We're sending them straight back into school, but not as pupils, but as educators, talking alongside teachers, and they really have the expertise. And that's hugely empowering. So it instantly raises their self-esteem. The first time they go into the classroom, they do need a spare pair of knickers, but the second time, they love it, and they come out so excited about what they've done. It's extraordinary. And we're giving them real paid work experience. We interview them, we assess them, we appraise them, we do all the normal things that you do in employment, except we're very kind to them. I have to say that, perhaps sometimes a little too kind to them. We can give them references when they go on to their next stage. We give them qualifications, NVQ level 2 equivalent in peer education and career planning. It's not a lot, but it's something, and it's very valuable to them and to their self-esteem. And at the moment, 95% of our teenage parents are accessing education, employment and training. We thought that was pretty good. We're a very small charity, but we pack an enormous punch. Last year, we employed about 80 teenage parents. In the last couple of years, I think we've reached about 12,000 kids in schools, and we work across 11 boroughs now. So there's all these things we can offer teenage parents, and we really wanted to capture that somehow. The first time I heard about social return on investment, was on a university degree course that I did just recently. And then later on, when the charity engaged closely with the Centre for Social Justice, they were going on about it as well. And I thought, perhaps this is quite important. Perhaps we ought to do something about it. So, was it for us? Well, there's a lot of challenges for the third sector. I mean, we all know about the economic climate at the moment. I don't even need to tell you about that. But there is reduced funding for charities, of course, because what's happening is that house prices have gone down, so legacies aren't as valuable. There's smaller pots of money. The trusts and foundations aren't getting the interest on their savings, so therefore there's less to give out to all of us. So we're living in very interesting times, and we need to prove much more. So we always have to be more and more accountable, it seems, as the years go past. We've had 4 independent evaluations of the success of our work. It's still not enough. So now we decided to have a slightly different one, which was a social return on investment. There's certainly less local authority staff around, lots of changes going on in local authorities, so therefore there's less funding there as well. But localism is a bit of an opportunity for us, because we can then engage closely with each local authority really on ground level, which is great. So what is a voluntary sector or a third sector organisation? It can be large, medium, small. It can be, you know, huge, mainstream almost part of government. Or it can be so small that it's an organisation that a grieving parent set up in response to something that happened to their child. And it could be that they're putting their own money into it because they're so passionate about it. So we're very, very broad in terms of a sector. We're dealing with a multitude of issues. Some are successful, some are not. Some are purely charities as well as social enterprises, not-for-profit businesses, KICs or cooperatives. And some people believe that we need to be purely philanthropic, and others believe that we have to work like a business. Well, we're working like a business, and this is where our SROI came in. Some people were saying that SROIs are a fad, and others were saying, no, this is something we've got to do to prove our value. But it's one of those things that it's in a long line of have and have nots for charities as well. So what was our first steps? Well, all charities are preoccupied with funding now, and it's very hard to stand back and believe the fundraising power of an SROI, which is just one of the benefits of it. But the rationale is there. There's reduced funding, so we've got to prove what we're worth, as I said before. And perhaps our sector needs rationalising anyway, and actually how many cancer charities do we really need with all those back office costs? But commissioning is complex for us, particularly as a small charity. So we've got to look at all sorts of different ways of raising funds. The issues of the SROI are numerous. More importantly, the cost, when we all want to spend much more money doing what we do best. We want to put courses on in schools. We want to employ those teenage parents. But we also had to raise funds for this SROI. But it did seem a bit of a luxury. We managed to raise our funds from 2 major private donors. And they kind of got it. They didn't completely got it. You know, Hugo asked how many people know what an SROI is here, and not many of you did. I do get a lot of blank looks when I'm talking about it, and I have to do a lot of explaining. Funders don't always get it either. And even some of the very large trusts don't think there's any value in it. So we really had to hunt around for that kind of support. There are some pro bono opportunities out there. Pro bono economics is one of them. But we also know that with pro bono, you tend to be at the bottom of the list for people to do the work for you. And you're hanging around for a long time. But it's absolutely vital to partner with the right organisation with the right expertise. So we had to look at all of these different things before we even embarked on it. And I had to convince my trustees that this was a good idea. We had to balance the value. How valuable is it going to be for us? Who's going to be looking at it? Will we expand because of it? We needed a lot of human resources to manage the information, because sometimes that takes quite a lot of time too. Meetings, and in our case, gathering information from focus groups and schools, arranging this with teachers, was quite problematic. And do we really need to be running about doing this kind of stuff when actually we just want to deliver our work? Then we had to decide what we needed to evaluate as well. And finally, who can do it well and who will give it kudos to others as well. So we were very lucky. We found that Deloitte would support us, and we thought, well, nobody's going to disbelieve Deloitte, that's for sure. If they do, they're bound to do a good job on it. And it was fantastic that we got that opportunity through their corporate social responsibility. And when I talked about Deloitte doing it, certainly a lot of people were impressed by that. So from the beginning, we thought it might be a good idea to include the Department for Education in our discussions as well. Then we had a meeting with Deloitte and we looked at the project scope. How far shall we go to do this? How are we going to do it? How large and where? What were we evaluating? What approach were we taking? What were the timescales? And believe me, we ran over because our timetable is very difficult and there's only a few of us. The management arrangements, who was responsible for what? Identifying stakeholders that were more important for the SROI. And then doing a draft impact map. What information could we gather? So bearing in mind we work across 11 boroughs, we decided to do two, as you can see, rather contrasting boroughs. There was Barking and Dagenham, which has a lot of tower blocks and a lot of poverty and has very high rates of teenage pregnancy. And then we did leafy Kingston upon Thames, an area on the edge of Surrey, with its Range Rovers and garden fetes and four-wheel drives, all that kind of thing. But actually, Kingston upon Thames does have high rates of teenage pregnancy in its pockets of deprivation, which was a totally different picture from Barking and Dagenham because the people were surrounded by all that wealth. We did a desk review. So Deloitte looked at our policies, our annual reviews, our past evaluations, our government strategies and research, national and local statistics, costs of teenage pregnancy and parenthood, and the impact of other initiatives. So there's sex and relationships education, there's all sorts of drop-in services, the social services, all the kind of support that teenage parents might get. And we did a collation of activities. How many schools do we go into in each area? How many sessions do we run? How many teenage parents? What's the gender split? What's the overall numbers? What's the ages of teenage parents and pupils? What's the course content, pupil and teenage parent evaluations, questionnaires, briefing sessions with teachers, peer education appraisals, the financial information, the cost of our service, this was very intensive for us. And we used the recommended format, which was the template recommended by the Social Return on Investment Network. Unfortunately, we had nothing to do with this. So we did a bit of face-to-face engagement then. Stakeholders, local authorities, schools, focus groups of pupils and teenage parents, interviewing the management, observation of course delivery from before the first session, and Deloitte did all of this for us, which was just lovely. However, implementing it was quite onerous for Straight Talking because the timing was tricky. There's always a school holiday, there's always a half term. We had to get into the schools at the right time. We had permission from the schools. We had to make sure everything was in place. And teenage parents can be tricky. They might not turn up. They might not answer your questions. They're challenging, which is why we work with them. So if they don't turn up for the focus group and you've spent all that time arranging it, that's pretty much par for the course. It's hard work. So what was the data analysis? By the way, this says data don't make any sense. We will have to resort to statistics on that cartoon. So the value for each outcome identified. Estimated duration of each outcome, the assigned monetary value for each outcome, estimated degree to which this might have happened anyway, and that's called dead weight, estimated degree to which other interventions might have helped, that's the attribution, and then calculated the net value of the outcomes minus the dead weight and the attributions. You can tell I'm not very good at this because I'm reading it out. This really isn't my thing at all. I left this to Deloitte, who were wonderful at it. And they calculated the values out over time. They added the values together, equaling the net present value, and then calculated the social return on investment. They then ran a sensitivity analysis and they tested different scenarios against the calculation. So what sort of things did they look at? Well, they looked at the peer educator's motivation, confidence, self-esteem, how it increased, the peer educator's mental health and well-being, and how it improved as a result of completing training and being employed to deliver the program. Peer educators, how they're trained to deliver the program, improving their skills base and future potential employability. Understanding relationships and friendships established and maintained between and amongst peer educators, reducing isolation. These are just a few of them. I won't tell you all of them. I've got copies of the SROI here if you'd like to look at them. And then how do we want it to look? It was important that we got the format of it right because we wanted it to be seen by certain people, and in particular we wanted it to be seen by funders and government so that we could have some input into government so that they could respect what we were saying and so that our policy report might be taken more seriously. And we wanted local authorities to look at it so that we could open local schemes, we could expand into different areas, and we could prove that this would save them money in the long term. Sorry, it wasn't also too technical. It was tailored to be useful for fundraising awareness and awareness raising. There was a precise executive summary. And it was clear for those who have a limited knowledge of social return on investment, like me, really. So the conclusions were, of those who were NEET, not in education, employment and training, prior to Straight Talking, 100% have gained valuable employment skills, 95% have accessed education, employment and training. But just as importantly, it captured the story behind the indicators and provided an insight into the value of the benefits of the programme. There were recommendations which we're taking very seriously. They're going to help us to move forward. Teenage parents and chaotic lives, and trying to do the social return on investment, some of them not turning up, but we had a pretty good number actually, 95% of them we got to, which was 81 who responded. And it was helpful as the prevention work was impossible to include in the SROI calculations. However, we did put something in about the prevention work. You can't measure the prevention, how many young people might not get pregnant. That was far more complicated. We needed to revalidate what we'd got as well. And the SROI has been identified by the Centre for Social Justice as a valuable framework for steering future statutory funding of services. The think tank has proposed the establishment of an independent body to measure the social return of policies and programmes. The Centre now intends to explore different ways of measuring SROI and considering how the principle could be introduced into government contracts. That's pretty powerful stuff. So the way forward, revalidating the SROI. Oops. We got a forward put into the SROI from someone who used to be the maternity czar for government, which we also thought would give it that importance, which was lovely. We want to share it with government, and we want to use it as widely as possible with our current funders, with our future funders, with local authorities, with anybody and everybody who wants to look at it. And I'm just going to leave you with a quote from one of our peer educators. The SROI analysis found that, this is the result, beg your pardon. So the SROI analysis found that the social return of straight talking for peer educators was £6.22 for every pound invested. And that was a pretty conservative estimate because it didn't take into consideration the future generations who would look at their parents and say, my parent is giving me a sense of achievement and a good role model. And this is the quote. Straight talking has played a huge part in getting my life back on track. I'll leave you to read the rest of it. And there's copies of the SROI. If you want to see an example, I've brought a number of copies with me. If there aren't enough, because you're all scrabbling for one, then I can send it to you by email. Thank you.